make at the moment of the balance between our fears of COVID and our fears for the economy and children's education in such a critical week when people are sending their children back to school, but perhaps fearful of going back to work?
I think fears of COVID are still uppermost in people's minds, and that's partly because it seems to be having a bit of a comeback. Government messages have been uncertain, sometimes conflicting, and I think the truth is people just don't really know what's happening. However, I think that the return of schools today, and it won't all happen at once, but it will certainly happen as September gathers pace, I think that for many people will be the beginnings of a return to some kind of normality, and also of the economy beginning to get back to some kind of normality too. Parents will be able to go back to work if their kids have gone back to school. It'll be a process, it won't happen overnight. There will be setbacks, there'll be local lockdowns, there will be quarantines issued here and there, too many in my view, done too quickly without thought. But I think unless there is a major second wave, this today is the beginning of a return to normality.
Kevin Maguire, the only thing that's worried me, all the numbers for the UK have been encouraging in terms of even the case numbers compared to the number of tests we're doing seem to make sense. Hospitalizations and deaths for COVID, thankfully, are very low. These are encouraging signs, no question. The one worry is what's been happening in some of the European countries, particularly France, where they've had an explosion in cases, but more significantly, I would argue, they've had a 23% week-on-week increase in hospitalizations. We know historically in this pandemic several weeks behind the likes of France. How worried do you think we should be about what's going on there?
I think we should be concerned. We should be worried. And of course, the number of infections, positive tests in the UK has gone up. It was about 700, more than doubled. I think 1,700 was the last case. And as winter comes on, the weather gets colder, we'll be forced more into indoors, where the risk of infection will go up. But of course, at the same time, we do need to get back to some form of life. And schools returning, they've gone back in Scotland, Northern Ireland already, going to go back in England, Wales. I think it's about 40% of England's local authorities are going to reopen their schools today. The others will stagger it this week and then next week. It is vitally important because those kids are missing an education which will blight their lives for the rest of their days if they do not begin to learn again. So it's a risk in the balance between lives and livelihoods, health and wealth, and the conflict between the two has always been there. The reason we got the infection rates down initially, stopped the plague spreading at the rate it was, the number of deaths that were occurring, was the social distancing. The fear of God was put into people by the government, told to stay at home. And now we're being told to get back to school, get back to work, and all that is quite right. But I don't think we'll ever return to where we were, because a lot of office workers will never go back into work.
Isabel Oakeshott, what you need in these troubled times is leadership and confidence. And when you have a look at the situation with schools, with a huge number of school pupils going back this week and a huge number of teachers and parents anxious, is an education secretary who presided over a shambolic summer of A-level and GCSE results. Heads rolled, but not his. Is he the person who the Prime Minister has confidence in to inspire this sense of going back confidently into the classroom?
Well, in short, no. But you talk about leadership, and I wonder, where is the leadership from Boris Johnson at this point? I'm much more concerned about the kind of vacuum right at the top of government. I don't think there's really many voters who would say at this point that Boris Johnson is providing inspiring, confidence-building, present leadership of the type that his supporters led us to believe that we would get from him. I never really believed that Boris Johnson would provide that kind of leadership, but he has been found sorely wanting in this crisis. I just don't know where he is. Has anyone seen Boris? I mean, the last pictures I saw of him, he was wearing a ridiculous hat and looking a complete shambles outside some tent that he'd been forced to take down in a field in Scotland. It is very weird. As for Gavin Williamson, look, I mean, I think his leadership on education has been very weak. I think he's utterly failed to stand up to the unions. And I think the government is still sending very mixed messages. I mean, this idea that they might delay exams next summer, all that says to the unions is, you know, if you just push a little bit harder, you'll get a little bit more slack in the system. And how long does this whole thing go on for?
Yeah, I mean, Andrew Neil, the big problem for this government and for Boris Johnson, as Isabel just said, is I think trust is plummeting because of the sheer volume of U-turns that they've made on key policies. But I would think more worryingly for Boris Johnson, with my journalist hat on, was a piece in The Telegraph over the weekend in which the headline was revealed how on every measure Britain's response to the COVID pandemic has been woeful. And the subject heading was, you can cut the data in different ways, but the UK sits at or close to the top of the league tables for death, whichever way you slice it. We also sit currently at the top of the worst performing on the economic front as well. So it would seem that at almost every level of how we've handled this, we have failed so far. And the significance of that is not so much looking back, and there'll be a time to do that with inquiries and so on, but looking forward, we have to trust the same people to make these big, big decisions. And it seems to me they're basically waiting at the moment for Nicola Sturgeon to do something.
And then they follow in her
do
footsteps.
it 2 days later. There's no direction from the heart of government in this country.
I think it is directional, lack of direction. I mean, everything you said was true before you went on the summer break, and it's true now today you've come back on the summer break. U-turns, I think, matter more to people like us than to the public. If the U-turn is in the direction of public opinion, then the public thinks, good, we're glad to return. For example, school lunches was one. There have been a lot of U-turns, though, and that can be corrosive over time. But I think the bigger issue is what you've said, is the lack of direction. Where is this government going to go? Now, we've had the biggest, steepest dive of most economies in the second quarter. We've recovered a bit in the third quarter. The test will be what is going to happen in the fourth quarter. Are we going to have a V-shaped recovery, or are we in for some kind of a slow recovery, or even something of a recession? Now, when you look at the cabinet, I don't think you could say that this was a stellar cabinet of all the talents. From the Prime Minister down, there are not many A-division politicians.
And Andrew, is that because Boris Johnson had a clear-up? Because unless you backed him on Brexit, you were gone. And so a number of the former experienced cabinet-level ministers found themselves booted out.
I think it's partly the Tory gene pool is not particularly strong at the moment in the first place. And then if you exclude everybody who was against Brexit, you've depleted that gene pool even more. Many of these ministers are young, untried, untested. They've not quite made it when asked to step up to the crease. They've found their middle wicket has been smashed to the ground. And it's been difficult for them because they faced the unknown and they themselves were not quite equipped to do it. Now, the task as the political season, and plus I would add in too, as we start this new political season, that for the first time in a while, this Conservative government now has a real opposition. It has an opposition which seems to know what it's doing, that is calling it to account. That will make life difficult for it too. So Mr. Johnson has got to give a sense of direction now, of re-engage with the people that elected him and give him his 80-seat majority. And the Chancellor, when it comes to his budget, we're told in November, has got to give a direction, an economic direction for this country, which has been lacking for quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, Isabel, Gavin Williamson, for example, I've been watching his work this year, and I am struggling to think of any cabinet minister in living memory who's been so utterly useless with absolutely everything on his brief, and yet all the accountability has gone to people down the food chain.
Also,
civil servants and other people.
And Andrew picked up on your point about U-turns, and if U-turns happen in the benefit of the public, then they're broadly accepted by voters. But in Gavin Williamson's case, his U-turn came after pupils got results which didn't reflect their achievements and left too many people without the opportunities that they were hoping for.
Let's cut to the quick. He's utterly useless. I don't know anybody in the world who defends Gavin Williamson, and yet there he is,
Prime Minister.
still education
Prime Minister
secretary.
defends Gavin Williamson.
You know, we would put these questions to, I would say this to his face if he had the balls to come on the show, but we're now on to day 126 of their boycott. But, you know, there is a serious point here, is that the education of our kids is utterly paramount, and it is being severely damaged by this pandemic. I don't blame the government for the pandemic, but I blame them for the chaotic way that they've been handling education of our children this year. And we've all had, Susanna and I have both had, with various of our kids, direct.
I had a double whammy.
Right.
I had a GCSE student and I had an A-level student.
Yeah, and I've got a young son at university. I've got another one just come out of drama school. You're seeing the real impact of what's happening with the education system across the board on these kids, and it's incredibly tough for them. My question, Isabel, is this. Why doesn't Boris Johnson do something about somebody as damaged as Gavin Williamson? What does Williamson have on him that he doesn't bring somebody in? And I would suggest,
He's a former chief whip, by the way.
There are a number of people that Boris Johnson let go in the sort of Brexit purge that you could bring back who would provide immediate stability and confidence, in my opinion.
Well, perhaps Gavin Williamson is quite useful in absorbing some of the grief that would otherwise be directed in the Prime Minister's way. I mean, I actually don't agree with you that Gavin Williamson is fundamentally useless. He was actually a pretty good Defence Secretary, apart from his little, I think Russia should go away and shut up. I mean, that was
apart
obviously...
from the fact that he had to be fired because he was accused of leaking secrets. I mean... he was fired by Theresa May. How good can you be when Theresa May decides you're not good enough for her cabinet?
If he did leak those secrets, it was quite helpful, actually, because it exposed what was going on in a very important story.
Yeah, but Defence Secretaries should not be releasing secrets, should they?
I'm not going to. That's another story for another day. I'm not going to defend Gavin Williamson's performance over education. Like you, I've got two girls who had basically next to no state education for the last 5 months. It has been absolutely woeful. But I think we need to direct our frustration more at the teaching unions, who are making Gavin Williamson's job virtually impossible.